Aaron DeVries is the founder of Inclusion Dad, an organization whose mission is building stronger communications through inclusion. His commitment to inclusion is evidenced by the tattoo on his left arm. He is the father of two young adults. He was thrust into the world of disabilities and special education after his daughter was diagnosed with epilepsy and cerebral palsy at an early age. He has spent over 15 years advocating for inclusion for his daughter in school and the community. He has served on various boards and committees of disability-related organizations. He has given a TEDx talk entitled The Power of Inclusion. Take it away, Aaron.
Thank you very much for that introduction. Let me see if I can share my stuff here. Can you see that okay? Yes, okay. So yes, my name is Aaron DeVries. Like she said, I'm the father of two adult children. My son was born in 2001, and then 15 months later, my daughter was born. As she said, and I've given a TEDx talk on inclusion. As she mentioned, I knew nothing about special education. When I think back to my childhood, I don't remember anybody with a disability using a wheelchair, anything that I can remember. So when my daughter was born, it was a whole new world for me. Like she said, 3 months old, she was diagnosed with epilepsy, later cerebral palsy. Got into the school system during the early childhood portion. I'm from Minnesota, so that's where I'm based. We've lived here my whole life. That's where all of my daughter's education has been. For context, so since we didn't know anything about special education, we just kind of went along with what the school was telling us, trusting that they were giving us all the information and presenting the options to us, that type of thing. So because of that, she was sent to a segregated setting across town. Her brother walked a block to the neighborhood school. She was bused across town to this, the school where, children like her were supposed to go. Later found out about inclusion and then worked after that to get her, fully included with her peers. So that's a little bit of my story for the beginning here. I will share other stories throughout the presentation, but that's a little bit of my background. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover during this webinar. Going to talk about the definition of inclusion, principles of inclusive education, the benefits, the role that parents and caregivers play, have some questions you can ask your child's school, and then at the end, the things you can do to be more inclusive. So that's what we're going to cover today. So I first grabbed like the dictionary definition of an inclusion. So the second one is more relevant to inclusion in school and community, the practice or policy of providing equal access to opportunities and resources for people who might otherwise be excluded or marginalized, such as those who have physical or intellectual disabilities and members of other minority groups. So that's the dictionary definition. This next slide is a graphic I've discovered quite a while ago, but I still like how it talks about inclusion. So the first upper left box says exclusion, and that is showing us that occurs when students are directly or indirectly prevented from or denied access to education in any form. So that's where they're not even allowed to go to school. So that's what that one is. The next one is segregation. That's when students have access to education in some form, but it's in a separate environment designed or used to respond to a particular various impairments in isolation from other students. So that I kind of view my daughter's first placement as that, where she was in school, but she was in a self-contained classroom down the back hallway through closed doors, and that's where her education was in the early years. The next box is integration, process of placing persons with disabilities in existing mainstream education institutions. as long as it can adjust to as long as the students can adjust to the standardized requirements of the institution. So putting the kids in the classroom, but not changing the classroom to meet the children's needs, expecting the children to, conform to what is already in place. The last one shows inclusion, where you're in the classroom, modifications have been made, you're changing your structures to meet the needs of all the children in the room, not so that the environment is adjusting to the needs of the children, not the children having to conform to what is already in place. So the next thing I want to talk about is just statistics on inclusion. So inclusion is like how much the children are in the classroom with their typically developing peers. So these are some statistics that I grabbed off a government website. So it showed that in the 2021-22 school year, 7.3 million students qualified for special education, or about 15% of all public school students. The next part here kind of breaks out by the disability type, what percentage of those 7.3 million were those types. So you can see that the largest grouping was the specific learning disabilities, and so forth. I wanted to point out my daughter, she qualifies under in Minnesota, they call it the severely multiply impaired. So she qualifies under multiple categories. She had vision, PT, OT, speech. So she, like I said, she qualified under many of the categories. So she was classified as multiply disabled. So of those 7.3 million children in the US, 2% or less of them qualify under the category that my daughter qualifies under. She also uses a wheelchair to get around. So that's also another thing we had to work on, the accessibility piece. This one talks about the percentage of time that they spend in the general education classroom. So obviously full include, I mean, when I talk about inclusion, I believe in full inclusion. I want her to be included fully in the general education classroom. So that's my definition, my personal definition. So this kind of describes of those 7.3 million, what percentage spend their time under these categories. The first one is the federal setting 1. So if they're spending 80% more of their time, and it's talking about between 2010 and 21. So in that time period, it went from 61 to 67. So it increased 6%. The setting 2 increased, actually decreased. Yeah, decreased from 20% to 16. And then the setting where it's 40%, less than 40%, also that one decreased slightly. So, but I just want to give a little background on that. And this here is where I pulled it from, the National Center for Education Statistics off their website. So this one talks about of those that spent 80% or more of their time in the general education classroom, a breakdown again by the different categories you can qualify for. So if you had a diagnosis or you qualified under the category of speech or language impairment, 88% of those students were in the general education classroom 80% or more of the time. So these 5 categories are over 2/3 in the 80%, and then these ones here are less than 1/3 of the students with those disabilities spent 80% or more. So like I said, my daughter qualified under the multiple disabilities category. So of that category, there's only 15% of those students are included 80% or more of the time during their day. This is just a graphic that I've come across from Brooks Publishing. They put out a lot of great inclusive books and literature. We will know that inclusive education has really become embedded in our culture when the term becomes obsolete. I agree with that. We're still talking about inclusive education, still fighting for it. So we're not there yet. But that I agree with that. The next thing I wanted to talk about, and feel free if you have any questions, put them in the chat, or raise your hand, and I can answer them as we're going here. Or if you just want to wait till the end, that's okay too. So the next thing I want to talk about is the principles of an inclusive education, and this I grabbed from a Think Inclusive podcast. They do a lot of great inclusion stuff, and it was a episode they had with Dr. Shelley Moore, who I love her stuff. She's really great, has a lot of great inclusion content as well. So she had well, they were talking about her doctoral thesis paper, and what her research she had come up with for that on the five, they call them the 5 P's of inclusive education. So these are the key factors that contribute to successful inclusion, and she had done her research on secondary settings. The first one, in order for the a key factor that contributes to successful inclusion, those adults in the school system, they need to have positive attitudes, are crucial for successful inclusion in secondary schools. Seems simple, but even from my experience, if the adults, teachers, administrators, support service staff don't have a positive attitude about inclusion, don't see it as something that they do in the school, something that needs to be done. In our personal experience, it was it made the trying to get her included more very tough. We had a very different view on inclusion than the school did, and that was always part of our fight, trying to get our needs and points across in that situation. The next part is that students must be placed in inclusive classrooms to have meaningful inclusion experiences. This also seems pretty simple, but obviously if they're not even in the inclusive classrooms, inclusion is not going to be successful. So just getting them into the classroom is just obviously a needed step. The third thing that she identified was that shared community and learning experiences with peers are essential for fostering belonging and participation. So they not only need to be in the classroom with their peers, but they're also, once you're in the classroom, you need to have stuff that you're working on together with those peers in that setting. So, to foster the belonging and participation. The fourth thing she identified is that purposeful goals that align with grade level curriculum are necessary for meaningful inclusion. So you're in the classroom doing things with your peers, but the goals also have to align with what's going on in the classroom as well. And then the fifth thing she identified was that planning for all students from the start rather than adapting and modifying promotes equitable access to education. So if you're a key factor to make the inclusion more successful is if we're planning for all students from the start, instead of have planning a certain way and then a student comes into the classroom and then modifying things later, using like universal design for learning earlier on to kind of make the curriculum accessible to multiple different levels of learning from the start, makes it a lot better. Another graphic that I like, I've liked this one as well, showing that the mixed messages come in, everyone is welcome, celebrate diversity, and there's the arrow on the front door, special education around the side. The access for handicap accessible is in the back, and then looks like Gen Ed's got camouflage in the bushes there. So just the mixed messages that we are sent. A story that I will share in regards to this, since there's a door there. I looked it up to find out, but in 2013, our town was going to build a new 5th and 6th grade school, and I had gone to a parent-teacher conference, a parent-teacher presentation where the principal was going around and showing a blueprint of the school, talking about the new school that was going to be built, and I was looking up at the screen, and on the blueprint, there was a door labeled special education entrance. So I was like, it's kind of weird. We're in 2013 and there's a door that special education students are to go through in a brand new school. And so after that, I questioned the principal. I saw this on the blueprint. What is that about? And I just looked over the emails earlier today, actually, just to make sure I had my story straight. But there was concern because of the number of students, my daughter in the wheelchair, that she wouldn't be safe entering the regular door. So I have my email chain of going back and forth with the principal, that, I mean, she needs to come in through the main door. We go to Walmart, any other building, anywhere, there isn't a separate door. I mean, she needs to learn how to access the buildings just like everybody else, so she can do it out in the community. So that was one experience that we had, and that was just 11 years ago, so not too long ago, way after ADA passed and all the other laws. So something that we were not expecting. Next, I want to talk about the benefits of an inclusive education. So these are benefits of inclusion for students with disabilities. Friendships, increased social initiations, relationships, and networks. So, I mean, if you're in the general education setting, you're going to have more chances for, those social initiations, relationships, peer role models for academic, social, and behavior goals. So, general education peers as role models. You're around those students who are, accessing the curriculum, showing appropriate behavior. I mean, that's a good role model for all students. The research shows there's an increased achievement of IEP goals. So students, special education students in the general education setting, show increased achievement of the goals. Obviously, greater access to the general curriculum. If you're in the room where the general curriculum is being taught, you're going to have better access to it. Enhanced skill acquisition and generalization, shows that you're better chance of acquiring the skills and generalizing them when you're in that general education setting, rather than working on them in a separate place, and trying to bring them in there and use them. You're better success in the general education room. Increased inclusion in future environments. That's, in my mind, that is, another reason I wanted my daughter to be included is kids at school see her, recognize her, teachers, more staff see her, recognize her, go out in the community. People come up to her and say hi, because she is in that setting where she's around more kids and more people. Greater opportunities for interactions, higher expectations. Often the general education setting has higher expectations. Increased school staff collaboration. I mean, all these things aren't the benefits that everybody sees, just stuff that they've found. So they're saying your increased school staff collaboration when you're in the general education setting. That's obviously dependent on different schools, different scenarios. Then increased parent participation. And then the last one that shows families are more integrated into the community as well. Another graphic I have here is just inclusion is not a program, but a guiding philosophy for making decisions about where and how we educate our students. It's another good one I like. So these are the benefits of an inclusive education for students without disabilities. Just increased friendships, increased appreciation and acceptance of individual differences. Like I said, I didn't grow up around anybody that I remember having a disability or in a wheelchair. I'm sure there were people with disabilities when I was in school that just were not, it wasn't talked about, or they weren't out in the general education setting. So I wasn't able to, be around them, appreciate them, and accept them in a way that I would have if I would have been, had them in my classes with me. Increased understanding and acceptance of diversity. Just I mean, if you're around people who aren't like you, you're more understanding and more accepting. Generally, learn respect for all people, even those that don't look like you or don't act like you. Prepares all students for adult life in an inclusive society. Um, that's another big one for me. My daughter, she's gonna, after school's over, she'll age out of the school system when she turns 22 in October. So she'll be not in the school setting anymore, but out in the community more. So just, again, if she's recognized, other people will come up. The hope is people will recognize her, come up, say hi, help her out if they see that she needs help. Opportunities to master activities by practicing and teaching others. Greater academic outcomes for those students that aren't in special education as well. And then all students' needs are better met, greater resources for everybody. Because if they're maybe, for instance, in a co-taught room, if the co-teacher is using other methods to make sure that everybody is able to access the curriculum and the different work that needs to be done, it helps everybody, not just those in special education. I got thirsty. This is one of my favorite flow or graphics on inclusion. It usually makes me laugh. It's just like a flow chart. Can you be included? Do you have a disability? Yes or no? No. Yes, you can be included. And then yes, are you breathing? No, not a good chance that you can be included, but if you can breathe, you can be included. It's just kind of funny, kind of sad at the same time, but it's another good graphic that I came across a while ago. So my experiences with inclusion are as a parent. I do not have a teaching background or anything like that. So my experience, like I said, is on the parent side. I do currently, I'm an advocate. I help other families navigate the special education process. So I also have that role of sitting with families in IEP meetings, trying to get their children more included at school as well. So, but the vital role of a parent and caregiver, in my mind, just the advocacy piece and the support. I mean, you need to learn how to advocate for your child. If you want inclusion, try to, my recommendation is, if you know about inclusion, try to get them included from the start. Like I said, our story is, once she wasn't included at the beginning, it was a lot harder to get her back into the general education room because we needed to like prove that she could be in there, jump through hoops that she needs to, acquire this skill before she can be into the general education setting. So it's just much harder. You need to be able to collaborate with educators. You're not always going to agree. I didn't always agree with them because we had different viewpoints on inclusion, for instance, but you still need to learn how to work with the educators, set your emotions aside. As a parent, that can be very hard. It's my child, it's your child, and it can be very hard to set those emotions aside, but you need to do that. You need to have the homeschool connections. So to me, that's more about, if we're working on the skill at school, you need to have that level of trust and communication with the school. If we're working on the AAC device, for instance, or some skill at school, we need to try to do that at home as well, so it's consistent across the settings. Promoting inclusion at home. So just, if I want inclusion at school, I need to, in my own life, be inclusive, I feel. So just going out to different events, including being around people who aren't like us in the home setting, or go to church, for instance, and have other people that that be inclusive with them as well. And then just another huge thing is just building a support network. In our situation and others, our daughter, or my daughter, needs like somebody with her 24/7 for like daily living tasks. So just, it gets to be a lot of every day, all day, helping her support her the way she needs to be supported. You need, as a parent, to have time for yourself, find other families, people that are going through the same thing you are, to know that you're not alone, and figure out ways that they can help you and you can help each other. So the next part here I want to talk about is some questions you can ask your child's schools. So these are more of saying if you're looking into a new school or you're at a school, you've now discovered inclusion. What types of questions could you ask your child's school or potential school to see how they stand on inclusion or how inclusive they are? So the first one, I would ask, just straight up ask them, what is your definition of inclusion? Like I said, my definition of inclusion for my daughter is full inclusion. When I talk about inclusion with our school district, their definition of an inclusion is talking about having opportunities of inclusion, or like an inclusive phy ed class, and that for them is inclusion. So just getting a good, clear sense of what they even define it as would be a good starting place. The next thing, can you describe the inclusive practices in the classroom? What practices do you guys have in the classroom to be more inclusive? What support services are available for students with disabilities? How is individualized support provided? Do you have paras? What does that look like? Some peer supports. What does that look like? Next one, how do you foster inclusive social interaction? So how do you, as far as the social interaction piece at school, how do you make sure that's inclusive for everybody? And the last one on this slide is what communication channels exist between school and parents. Like I said, our daughter has a lot of needs. One of them being she has epilepsy, so she has a health plan in place at school. She gets seizure medications at lunchtime, prescribed meds at lunchtime. So just you have to have those. Want to know what are the channels? Who do I communicate with? If there's a concern about the medical side, who do I need to talk to? The nurse or the case manager? Just make sure that you understand what the correct channels are in that situation. This next set of questions is more things related to like what we had come across at school. So just some things to try to, we didn't think about until it happened. But in elementary school, in our district at least, the elementary schools had the school concerts, holiday concerts in the gym, would often bring in like risers. So first time we go to a concert, her class is, in the middle of the riser. She's way on the end of the riser by herself, or not with her class because she's in a wheelchair. So just how, if will my child be with their class? If not, how can we work to, rearrange where they're at on the riser so she can be with them? Does your child ride a separate bus to school and on field trips? In our district, she was always on a handicap accessible bus, which generally was just a special education bus, special education student bus. So she was never on a bus that was both accessible and hauled general education students. And then on field trips, is the bus that she's going to be on. If it's, on a trip with the general education class, will she be on a bus and then also have, kids from that general education class on the bus with her? I recall at least one time where we found out after the field trip had happened that she was on a bus like by herself. With her by herself and a pair, I think. And the rest of the class was in, a regular non-accessible bus. So once that happened, I asked the questions as a parent advocate. Is there a way we can get a bus that's both accessible, that all the kids can be on, so she can, experience that with them? And the last one on this slide is your child attending a separate program across town. That you're going to know that if that's where they send them, but just ask the question, is there another place she can go and be supported? Another one is when she was in younger grades, I would go and eat, go to school, eat lunch with her. It's not super good a feeling as a parent when you're walking into the lunchroom and you see your child sitting by themselves with the para, no other kids around them. So just asking, is my child going to be sitting alone during lunch, or was she able to sit with the general education students? Also, I think what happens sometimes is she's in the general education class part of the, for part of it, but the rest of it's in the special ed room. So which class will she be sitting with? And which ones does she want to sit with also? Keep her choices in mind. This one for us was a big one. She, like I said, my daughter uses a wheelchair. Are there accessible desks available for her in all the classrooms? I mean, inclusion doesn't work if yes, she's in the room, but there's no desk for her to sit at. I mean, how does she participate if she can't, pull up to a desk, get her workout on there and participate? So I think for a time there was a table that was rolled around with her, that she took with her everywhere she went, so she would have a place in each room where she could access it, have a place to work on. Is your child included in the general education classroom and able to participate fully? Does your child have access to the same academic and non-academic classes that their peers attend? So, I mean, if she's in ninth grade and the general education ninth graders are able to, choose this class, is she also able to choose that class, or is there certain classes she can't be in because she's a special education student? This one is about, questions just to ask your child. So I asked my daughter, like, how do you feel at school? Do you feel connected to your classmates? What activities do you participate in? Are you able to, or if your class is going outside to do something, are you also able to do that? How do the teachers help you learn? Or maybe they come around and ask, how can I help you? If she's on an IEP, there's accommodations. I ask them if the accommodations are they giving you like word banks or notes already, and are they handing you notes that are already done for you that you just have to fill in a word while you're listening, that kind of thing, if that's one of their accommodations. Is that being provided? And do you feel respected and listened to? And just one, like, who do you sit by at lunch? Kind of getting back at trying to figure out if is she sitting by herself or with other students. So this one, I've for a long time just thought about the inclusion more as, when she's home, we'll take her out in the community from that perspective. And then as far as the school part of it about it is just like, it's the school's responsibility to be more inclusive, pushing it all into them. But now I'm starting to approach it more of like, I can't control 100% for sure what the school does, but I can control what I do. So what are some things I can do in my life to be more inclusive for my daughter and just generally? So the first one I think is just lead by example. So be an inclusive role model by treating everyone with kindness, respect, and equality. How can I expect others to be inclusive if I'm not, modeling that myself? The next thing is just listen, listen and respect. So just listen to the needs and preferences of individuals with disabilities, and then respect their autonomy and choices just as you would with anyone else. She said, I have given one TEDx talk called The Power of Inclusion 10 years ago. Actually, next Wednesday, I'm going to be giving my second TEDx talk. This one, what I'm going to be talking about is like empathy, and then the personal responsibility piece for the inclusion. And in preparation for that, I asked a friend of mine who was born with cerebral palsy, told him I was giving my new TEDx talk. This is what I'm giving it on. Do you have any, what do you think about that? Any suggestions that, to tell people about how they can include you? And the first thing he said, without like a hesitation, is that if I'm out with other people, if I go to a restaurant, he's like, most of the time I'll ask the person I'm with what I want to, have for a drink or what I want to eat, instead of looking at me and asking me. So just that piece of being respectful, listening, ask the person with a disability, ask them first to have them answer you. So just something as simple as that. And I've experienced that as well. My daughter's in a wheelchair, so she's obviously lower. I'm standing. She's lower than me. A lot of times they will ask me what she wants instead of talking directly to her and asking her what her needs and wants are. The next thing is encourage participation. So encourage people with disabilities to participate in the decision making and processes and activities that affect them. So just encourage people with disabilities to participate in things. The next one I thought of was support inclusive policies. So advocate for policies and practices that promote inclusivity and accessibility in your community, workplace, or organization. So a way that you and I can, be more inclusive is if at our work in the community, any boards are on, think about how does this affect a policy, affect people with disabilities, and if it's negatively affects them, try to advocate to make the policy more inclusive. And the last one on this slide is just be accessible. So my daughter's in a wheelchair. I couldn't tell you the number of times we've been to places that it's either hard or to get into because of a wheelchair, or it's not even accessible at all. So just ensure that your spaces that you are in are accessible, and if they're not, bring it up. Why we should have a ramp. We should have a handicap parking stall for people with this, with the handicap stickers to be able to be here. If we don't, figure out why and, get that set up. So that's ways you and I can be more inclusive in our everyday life. This next slide, I think I found this yesterday on Facebook, but I really liked it. So it says, inclusion starts at home. We set the bar. The world won't ever learn to include our kids if we never take them out into the world. Yes, let them experience the world, but more importantly, let the world experience them. So there's been many times where we've been out around the community, going to the fair, church, anywhere, like different settings, and people have said to us, well, it's great that you take her out. And it's like, yeah, we take our other kids, our other kid out. Why is this weird? But this one really hit home, like I said, because of those comments we received. Like it does start at home. We set the bar. We need to include them for others to include them and experience them as well. So that is the end of what I had. So I will stop sharing. And then if you guys have any questions or comments, I would love to hear those.
This is Joseph Cosgriff. I'm a professor of special education. Here, I'll just put my video on real quick. I'm actually in the class. I'm in the classroom right now, but how would you want teachers that are being trained in learning about inclusivity? How would you want them to get that training, and be more responsive to you as a parent?
As far as just like the inclusion piece, you mean?
Yeah. So I'm hoping that the people that I'm teaching are going to become inclusive advocates.
Right.
So I feel like they're learning about what inclusion is, but maybe not as much about how do you actually go about making changes in a school system that you're, just starting in, or, working with a parent.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, because I mean, if you're a new teacher coming into a school district like I would say ours, where from the top, they're not pro inclusion, that would be a tough thing to be. I mean, I would just probably I would suggest just working with the parents directly. If the parents want inclusion, try to figure out ways you can, include that child more, kind of just from your perspective, and not try to push the big systems change. Just try to, they want more inclusion. Let's figure out a way to have it in the IEP, or, that from that side more. Cause I've heard stories of, I've listened to some podcasts. I don't remember who it was, where the teacher wasn't tenured, kind of pushed for the inclusion piece, got some stuff going, and then they never were tenured because the school district didn't like it. So I mean, you have to navigate that part of it, but I think just talking to the parents, seeing what they want. I mean, like I said, my definition in our school districts are different. So if the parents saying they want inclusion, okay, what does that mean to that family? Because I mean, my definition and their definition, even that parents, we have different ones maybe. So just understanding it. But the big thing for me for the inclusion is just it needs to start like the first you go to the IEP meeting, you need to start like with the setting being in the general education room and then work backwards instead of just my daughter, she's severely multiply impaired, has all these needs, automatically send her to the most restrictive setting. So just trying to have the teachers start with the like I said, the general education, at least start there and then work backwards instead of like, hey, she qualifies in 5 categories, boom, she automatically gets sent over here, that part of it. Does that help answer?
Yeah, that was great.
Thank you.
Another question that I kind of thought about is typically it's maybe this is gender bias, but typically it's mothers that are attending these meetings. Do you feel kind of a little bit out of out of your element in an IEP meeting, or do you feel kind of like you're accepted as male in an IEP meeting just as well as?
That's a very true question. I mean, yeah, as you said, I've gone to lots of like trainings for special education, IEP, been on, like the special education advisory council for our district. And like you're saying, it's highly female in those situations. So I mean, it does. Long ago, I got over the part where it's, I don't feel like out of place or weird. It's just, to me, it's kind of interesting. There are definitely certain, I feel like, professions or jobs where it's more of a nurturing. That's kind of the reason I've heard from people. Like it's kind of a more of nurturing viewed job, and it's just generally more females. I feel like I am accepted. I mean, I never felt like I was at a disadvantage, I guess, but I do definitely, that is a big thing where it's just not a lot of males, not a lot of, dads in this arena. And I talk about inclusion all the time, but it's hard to find a lot of dads. I mean, I think as a dad or a male, we just don't talk about this things a lot. I mean, you hang out with other guys, you're not talking about, hey, my kid's not being included at school, this kind of stuff. That's just not something that comes up in conversation usually, but I don't think it's a disadvantage, I guess.
Well, thanks, Aaron. I really appreciate your
Thank you.
presentation. I thought it was great.
Thank you.
Well, I guess that will end our webinar series today. Stay tuned for an email with the recording and a short survey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.